Avugeni viewers, welcome to today's episode of Load Shedding, a show that focuses explicitly on current affairs pertaining to the African continent. Today we shall be focusing on the controversy and the complexity surrounding the story of the land reform program in South Africa, where Julius Malema is at the forefront of getting the reforms done, albeit without compensation for the farmers that will be chased. It's going to be a long story. I'm going to try and break it down for you as best as I can. Enjoy the ride. My name is Kees. One thing is for certain. Since the time white settlers came to the land we now call South Africa and land grabbing begun, violence and death have been mixed with this topic ever since the beginning. And from the 90s, especially white farmers have been targeted, or in the 90s I should say, especially white farmers have been targeted and killed. There's even been a term dubbed for it called farm murders. Over the course of 6 years, between 1991 and 1997, the South African Agricultural Union, now Agri-SA, registered 677 murders and 3,065 attacks. Here are some more statistics of murders over the years after that. Please note, however, that it does not mean that only white farmers were killed. There was an old report that stated that just over 60% of those attacked or killed were white, but that is an old statistic. What I will say on the matter is that these attacks stem from a discontent with regards to how land reform has been tackled so far. I believe almost everyone would agree with me that it is almost high time, or that it is high time something is done about the land reform in South Africa. The land holdings in South Africa are amongst the most extreme in the world, even worse than Zimbabwe's was before the land reform fast-track program set up by Mugabe's government in 2000. According to an audit by the Agri-SA lobby, white farmers own almost 3/4 of South Africa's agricultural land. 2 decades ago, white farmers controlled about 85% of the land. Whoa. Agriculture creates jobs, especially on the countryside. A report over the production of agricultural goods in 2016 says that primary agricultural products were good for a whopping $22 billion. Under the current weak economic situation, the government run by Ramaphosa is reluctant to do anything that would undermine farm productivity. Make no mistake though, land reform is a top political imperative, regardless of whoever would run the ANC. However, the government had promised that by 1999, which is 19 years ago, 30% of white-owned farmland would be transferred to blacks. So far, only 10%, roughly, has been transferred. Despite its fiery rhetoric, the ANC government has shown remarkable little will towards enforcing land reform with the laws that are currently in place. Its allocation for buying up land for redistribution has slumped to less than 0.1% of the national budget. On top of that, the government is sitting on 4,000 farms that are waiting to be redistributed amongst blacks. Perhaps the biggest problem with the government's policies, good or bad, is that the administrative system is in many cases breaking down. Several thousand restitution claims lodged before 1998 await resolution, and the solutions to 20,000 resolved claims have not been implemented. New claims lodged since 2014 already number around 150,000 and could rise to 400,000. These managerial weaknesses are hitting communities meant to be the beneficiaries of government land purchases. At the current rate of progress, it would take about 141 years to resolve the backlog of land claims. The government's failures do not end there. Many of the farms that have been handed over to the new owners have failed because these new owners do not have the skills to run large commercial farms. Over the 70% of the estimated 8 million hectares of land that has been handed over to blacks after apartheid is now fallow. On top of that, a lot of these farmers, these new farmers that have been given land, have been selling off bits and bobs of the land, or maybe in its entirety, and usually it's back to white farmers. Ruth Hall, a land expert at the University of Western Cape, says that there's no need to change the constitution to redistribute land. Instead, standing in the way of land reform is not the property rights clause, but the implementation of land reform policies and procedures, and extended, entrenched corruption in the system. She wants the ANC to be bolder and start expropriations that make economic sense. The days of paying full market price during a buyout to farmers are over. And government entities expropriate land all the time. It's nothing new. In fact, when managed effectively, expropriation by government will concentrate minds and also speed up the land reform process. And you know what? She has a point. If you look at China, for instance, the state dictates what happens to land and the people follow suit. I bet they're looking at South Africa and laughing at how South Africa is handling the entire land reform process. Activists want the government to clean up existing legislation, ensure land reform is transparent, increase the Department of Rural Development and Land Reform's budget, and fill the large number of vacancies there. For activists such as Sizani Ngubane, a member of the Rural Women's Movement, land reform should not only improve living standards in the countryside, but change the balance of power. Ngubane works in KwaZulu-Natal, and her organization has been campaigning against horrific right abuses there. Indigenous people are treated like slaves on farms. But she also wants land reform to serve as a counterweight to the power of traditional leaders, most of whom refuse to allocate land to women in their own right. In many cases, the land is registered under the name of a male relative. Some traditional leaders are also abusing their position as managers of land on behalf of their communities by failing to consult them before striking deals with mining companies, says Ngubane. As a result, a lot of indigenous people that have lived on land for years face suddenly having to pay a lease on land or face eviction or simply being evicted altogether in favor of companies using that land. The government needs to start acting now, and they should start with the land that they already have in possession, the 4,000 farms that are yet to be redistributed. This would alleviate some of the irritations that are currently felt by the people. However, I'm not saying that they should redistribute like they did in the past, because then land would go fallow like what happened in the past. Instead, here are some alternatives that they could use. Partnerships between private investors and communities. The 50-50 framework. The government buys land and leases it back to a company co-owned by the farmer and farm workers. Workers need to be trained on how to run a farm before they can fully take over the entire process. So, what's my view on land reform without compensation? Well, when the white settlers came all those years ago and gave little to no money to the indigenous people for the lands that they now possess, why should it be any different now, vice versa? Make no mistake, the apartheid regime made sure that the white settlers had 85% of the land in control, and they also have almost the entire economy of South Africa in control today. So it's only fair that something is being done now to make sure that there's more of a balance, so that these blacks can also make money off their own country. However, I do think that a mere reshuffling of land is not going to solve the situation. As I've mentioned in this video as well, a few minutes before, more needs to be done, and there needs to be more cohesion between both black and white parties to make sure that this transformation is done correctly, so that there's no loss of knowledge or production in terms of farm produce. Also, I think people tend to forget one thing, and that is that these white people are actually Africans. It's not like they came recently. No, they've been there for many, many years, and therefore they need to be made part of the solution instead of people pointing fingers. I'm tired of hearing that. It's both parties need to work together to make sure that both come out of this better. And it's not just white settlers that, white-owned farms that need to be repossessed or reshuffled. Really, the government also needs to look at how the traditional leaders are treating their people or mistreating their people when it comes to land. Policies need to be put in place to make sure that this cannot happen. That's my view. I'd like to hear from you what your view is on this. Do you think that this land reform should happen? Do you think it shouldn't? Do you think that it's fair that it happens without compensation, or do you think this is bullshit? Compensation needs to be there. What are your suggestions towards solutions towards making sure that there's more of a balance in terms of ownership of land and or companies in South Africa? I'm looking forward to hearing from what you have to say on the matter. That was it for today. You can follow me on the platforms that have been appearing below on the screen. But before I end this, I'd also urge you to watch a clip from a Shaka Zulu series. There was a deleted scene that perhaps puts things into better perspective than I did in this video. I suggest you watch it. I've put it in the description link below. Let me know what you think on that as well. That was it for today. My name is Kees. Until next time. Bye-bye.